I bet you didn't know the full story behind America's struggle with gun control and police brutality. A nation born from revolution, built on stolen land, and sustained by the labor of enslaved people. From the genocide of Native Americans to the horrors of chattel slavery, violence has been used to subjugate, control, and silence. This legacy of violence continues to plague us today, manifesting in the twin epidemics of gun violence and police brutality. These issues are deeply intertwined and rooted in systemic racism. The Second Amendment, often cited as the bedrock of gun rights, was drafted in a time when the newly formed nation feared government tyranny. Slave patrols, the precursors to modern police forces, used violence to maintain the brutal system of slavery. The Second Amendment of the United States Constitution reads, "A well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed." This seemingly straightforward statement has been the subject of intense debate and interpretation since its ratification in 1791. Initially, it was understood as guaranteeing the right of states to maintain armed militias, a safeguard against potential tyranny. The concept of an individual's right to own guns for personal use, separate from militia service, was not widely accepted until much later. The rise of the National Rifle Association in the 20th century marked a turning point in the gun control debate. The NRA shifted its focus towards advocating for expansive gun rights, framing any attempt at regulation as an infringement on the Second Amendment. Today, the debate over gun control remains deeply polarized, with racial dynamics further complicating the issue. To understand the roots of police brutality in America, one must look back to the nation's origins. The institution of policing in the United States evolved from slave patrols, organized groups of armed white men tasked with capturing runaway slaves and suppressing slave rebellions. These patrols were granted broad authority to use violence and intimidation to maintain the system of slavery. Following the Civil War, many of the tactics of slave patrols were adopted by newly formed police departments, particularly in the South. Black people, newly freed but still denied basic rights, continued to face systemic violence and oppression at the hands of law enforcement. The Jim Crow era further solidified this racialized system of policing. Despite efforts at reform, black and brown communities continue to be disproportionately targeted by police. The fight for racial justice and an end to police brutality in America is a long and arduous one, marked by countless acts of courage, resilience, and sacrifice. Throughout history, there have been moments that have shaken the nation's conscience, shining a spotlight on the systemic racism and violence inherent in our criminal justice system. The brutal beating of Rodney King by Los Angeles police officers in 1991, captured on videotape, sparked outrage and protests across the country. The acquittal of the officers involved ignited the 1992 Los Angeles riots. More recently, the deaths of Eric Garner, Michael Brown, Tamir Rice, Freddie Gray, Breonna Taylor, George Floyd, and countless others have fueled a renewed movement for racial justice and police reform. The Black Lives Matter movement, born in the aftermath of Trayvon Martin's killing in 2013, has galvanized a generation of activists and allies. These names serve as a call to action, urging us to confront the uncomfortable truths about our nation's past and present. Over the past century, the struggle for civil rights and justice has seen significant milestones and setbacks. From the civil rights movement of the 1950s and 60s to the ongoing fight against systemic racism today, each generation has faced its own challenges and victories. The Civil Rights Act of 1964 and the Voting Rights Act of 1965 were landmark achievements, but the fight did not end there. The war on drugs in the 1980s and 90s disproportionately targeted black communities, leading to mass incarceration. Despite these challenges, the resilience and determination of activists have continued to drive progress. Today, the fight for justice and equality continues, with new generations pushing for systemic change. When we fail to address systemic racism and police brutality, the consequences are profound and far-reaching. Communities of color continue to suffer from disproportionate rates of violence, incarceration, and economic inequality. The failure to hold law enforcement accountable for misconduct erodes public trust and undermines the legitimacy of the criminal justice system. This lack of accountability perpetuates a cycle of violence and mistrust. The continued marginalization of Black and Brown communities exacerbates poverty and limits opportunities. Addressing these issues is essential for the health and stability of our nation. Looking ahead, the future of justice and equality in America depends on our collective willingness to confront and dismantle systemic racism. This requires a multifaceted approach that includes policy changes, community engagement, and a commitment to equity and inclusion. Reimagining public safety is a crucial step, investing in community-based alternatives to policing. It also means holding law enforcement accountable and ensuring that officers are trained to serve all communities with dignity and respect. Education and awareness are equally important, fostering a more inclusive and empathetic society. Achieving justice and equality requires sustained effort and collaboration, listening to the voices of those most affected by injustice. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to subscribe, follow, and share our channel, Map My Saga, on YouTube, Facebook, and Instagram for more insightful content.